The wheelchair sat crooked on the concrete. One wheel slightly off-center. A thin hospital gown pulled tight across a swollen belly. Cold morning air, the kind that bites through fabric like it has teeth. Selim Viral pressed both hands flat against his stomach. Breathed in. Breathed out. Another wave hit. Not a cramp. Not discomfort. Contraction. It rolled through him hard and slow, like something deep and unmovable shifting beneath the surface. He gripped the armrests and waited for it to pass. It always passed. That was the lie he kept telling himself. The glass doors of Oraline Medical Center were 15 feet away. 15 feet. He had counted the distance twice. Inside those doors, warmth. Nurses. Monitors. Safety. The kind of safety that came with fluorescent lights and sterile floors and people who knew what to do when a body started fighting itself. Outside those doors, Selim had arrived at 6:42 in the morning. The intake desk had smiled. Polite. Professional. They had taken his paperwork and typed something into a computer and then asked him to wait. That was 47 minutes ago. The contraction passed. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Insurance authorization hasn't cleared yet. The woman at the desk had told him, "We can't process your admission until the system confirms your coverage. Standard procedure. It shouldn't take long." She had said it the way people say things that aren't their fault. Selim had nodded, because Omegas like him learn early. Not in a classroom, not from a book, but from years of small moments stacked one on top of the other, that the system rarely listens. You can argue. You can raise your voice. You can explain carefully that you are 9 months pregnant and the baby has been pressing down for the last 4 hours. And the answer will still be, "Please wait." So he waited. A woman passed through the entrance with a coffee cup and a visitor badge. She glanced at him, looked away, kept walking. A security guard stood just inside the lobby. He had seen Selim arrive. He had not moved. Sometimes cruelty doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply asks you to wait. Hi viewers. Have you or someone you know ever been turned away from help when you needed it most? Drop your experience in the comments below. The sky above him was the flat gray of early winter. The kind of gray that didn't promise snow, just cold. Just endless, pressing cold. His robe was thin. His feet were in paper-thin hospital slippers. He had brought a small bag with him. It sat on his lap now, clutched in both hands like something he was afraid might disappear if he let go. Inside the bag, a clean onesie, 2 receiving blankets, a folded piece of paper with a phone number written in blue ink. He hadn't called the number. Not yet. Another contraction started. This one didn't roll, it slammed. White behind his eyes. A low sound pulled itself out of him before he could stop it. He bent forward slightly in the chair, both hands pressed hard against the underside of his belly, and breathed through clenched teeth. A camera mounted above the entrance pointed outward. The red light beside its lens blinked once, twice. Oraline Medical Center was one of 14 hospitals in the city connected to the CADE Consortium's private infrastructure monitoring network. It was a back-end system, quiet, invisible, automatic. It flagged anomalies, overcrowding, equipment failure, security risks. It also flagged unusual activity at entry points. At 7:31 that morning, the system generated an alert, an image, still frame, time-stamped, person in a wheelchair, outside the entrance, alone. Duration, 49 minutes. The alert was routed to 3 oversight terminals. 2 of them were staffed by administrators who would check it after their morning briefing. The 3rd terminal sat on a polished desk inside a moving black sedan headed north on the I-7 corridor. The man sitting at that desk had dark eyes and a stillness about him that people tended to mistake for calm. It wasn't calm. Cade looked at the still image on his screen. He looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. His driver noticed the silence first. In 7 years behind that wheel, the driver had learned to read Varen's silences the way a sailor reads weather, not by what was there, but by what suddenly wasn't. The sedan was doing 62 miles an hour. Varen set the tablet down on the leather seat beside him. His voice, when it came, was quiet, completely quiet. Turn the car around. And 3 black sedans, one ahead, one behind, one alongside, changed direction. The hospital had no idea what was coming. The cold had worked its way through the robe now, not just sitting on the surface of Selim's skin. It was inside, threaded through the spaces between his ribs, pressing against the warmth of the child curled underneath. He pulled the robe tighter. It didn't help. He could hear the hospital through the glass doors. Soft voices, the distant roll of cartwheels, a phone ringing twice and stopping, the sounds of a building doing its job, and doing it entirely for the people already inside. Selim looked down at his stomach. The shape of it still surprised him sometimes. The sheer physical reality of another person existing inside his own body. A whole person. Fingernails and a heartbeat and an opinion about sleep positions. Just hold on, he whispered. His voice was steady. He made it steady. He had been making things steady for a long time. Growing up Omega in the Westwick district meant learning early that the system was not designed with you in mind. It wasn't hostile, not exactly. Hostility would have been easier to name. What it was instead was indifferent. Insurance networks that excluded Omega-specific care. Clinics that required primary physician referrals nobody had time to get. Emergency rooms where triage scores quietly deprioritized low-income patients with no flags in the system to mark them as urgent. It wasn't malice. It was architecture. And Selim had learned slowly how to navigate the architecture. Which offices would see him same day. Which pharmacies would work with him on payment plans. Which hospital had a back entrance staffed by a nurse named Dory, who would make sure you got a bed, even when the system said there wasn't one. He had done everything right this time. Pre-registered. Filed his intake forms 3 weeks early. Called to confirm insurance twice. And he was still sitting outside. Systems rarely fail loudly. They fail quietly, and only the powerless notice first. A nurse appeared at the glass doors. Young. Dark braids tucked under a scrub cap. She had a chart in one hand and a set of keys clipped to her hip. She looked through the glass at Selim and stopped walking. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed her face. She took one step toward the door handle. Then she stopped, looked down at the chart in her hand, looked back up at him, and walked away. Selim watched her go. He wasn't angry. He understood. Policy. Protocol. The invisible weight of institutional rules that turned good people into bystanders. She hadn't wanted to walk away. He had seen it in her face. That small war between what was right and what was permitted. Permission won. It usually did. He reached into his bag. The piece of paper was folded into quarters. He had folded and unfolded it so many times the creases had gone soft. He opened it carefully. 10 digits. Blue ink. A handwriting he recognized. Varen Cade had pressed that paper into his hand 14 months ago. Said nothing. Just looked at him with those still, dark eyes and waited while Selim decided whether to take it. He had taken it. He had never called. Because powerful men make promises the way weather makes promises, with complete sincerity and no guarantee of delivery. Selim had spent enough of his life believing in weather. He had left instead. Built something careful, something his, but his hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. Another contraction hit, harder than the last. His whole body tightened, and for 5 seconds he couldn't breathe at all. Just held, suspended in the grip of something that didn't care about his plans or his pride or his reasons for not calling. When it passed, his phone was already in his hand. He didn't call. He typed instead. 3 words. I need help. He stared at the message for 3 full seconds. Then he sent it. Somewhere across the city, inside a moving car traveling at speed. A phone screen lit up on a leather seat. And the man who had given Selim that number, the man who had been staring at a security still frame for the last 11 minutes, reached for it. Most people who feared the Cade name had never met any of them. That was intentional. Fear, Varen had learned long ago, was most effective when it operated at a distance. Up close, fear required maintenance, constant demonstration, constant threat. At a distance, it ran on its own, on reputation alone, on the slow accumulation of stories that passed from person to person until the truth of them barely mattered anymore. What mattered was the weight, and the Cade name carried weight. Not from violence alone, though the Cade Consortium's past held more than enough of that. The weight came from infrastructure, from the invisible architecture of a city that many people lived in but few understood. The 17 port contracts that moved 70% of the region's commercial freight. The private security agreements with 42 municipal buildings. The medical supply chains that stocked the storage rooms of 9 hospitals, including, as of 3 years ago, Oraline Medical Center. The servers that ran Oraline's building management system. The monitoring network that had just flagged a security still frame. The car was quiet. Varen sat with his phone in his hand and the message open on the screen. 3 words. He read them 3 times, which was 2 more times than he needed to understand them. On his left, Syrah. Syrah Cade was the one who thought before he moved. He had their father's eyes and their mother's patience, and he had used both to build the legal architecture that made the consortium nearly impossible to touch. He was not a man who reacted. He was a man who calculated. Right now he was watching Varen. On his right, Draxon. Draxon Cade was different. He was the one who moved first and explained afterward. Where Syrah built walls, Draxon walked through them. He had a stillness that was not calm at all. It was the specific stillness of something waiting. Varen passed the phone to neither of them. Instead, he pulled up the security image again and held the screen so both brothers could see. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Syrah spoke first. They made him wait outside. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a mind processing something and filing it under a category that had consequences. Draxon said nothing for a moment. Then, they made a mistake. 2 sentences, said differently, meaning the same thing. Varen put the phone in his jacket pocket. Drive, he said. The 3 sedans had already changed direction. Now they accelerated. Syrah opened his own tablet. His fingers moved across it with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this before. Opened the right access panel, entered the right credentials, navigated to the right database, and pulled up the hospital's internal system logs. He wasn't breaking anything. The Cade Consortium's infrastructure contract gave its oversight division red access to the building's operational systems. It was all contractual, all documented, all perfectly legal. He searched for Selim's name. He found the intake record. He read it twice. Then he read the timestamp. Then he looked at the current time. Varen, his brother turned. Selim was never entered into triage. Syrah's voice carried no heat, just information, just the flat precision of a fact being delivered. The intake record shows initial paperwork. No triage entry, no wait time log, no patient flag for active labor. Varen looked at him. The system shows he arrived, Syrah continued, and then nothing. As far as the hospital's internal records are concerned, he paused. He doesn't exist. The car moved faster, and somewhere ahead of them, behind a wall of glass and polished floors and institutional indifference, Selim Viral sat in a wheelchair in the cold, officially invisible, and waited for help that wasn't coming. Until now. The first sedan pulled into the patient drop-off lane at 7:58 a.m. It stopped. The second and third followed, pulling parallel with the kind of coordination that looked casual and was anything but. The doors opened. Security staff at the entrance post saw them first. Both guards straightened at the same time, a reflex, something in the posture of the men stepping out of those vehicles that bypassed conscious thought entirely and went straight to the part of the brain that measured threat. One guard reached for his radio. Then he saw the face of the man in the center. His hand stopped. Word moved through the lobby the way electricity moves through wire. Fast, invisible, unavoidable. A desk clerk looked up. A hospital administrator passing through with a folder paused mid-step. Two nurses near the elevator bank turned at the same time without knowing why. Draxen was first through the door. Then Sira. Then Varen. No one spoke to them. No one moved to intercept. Varen didn't look at the lobby. He didn't look at the nurses or the administrator or the guard who was now very carefully looking at everything except him. He walked directly to the glass entrance doors, the ones that opened to the outside, the ones that had been closed to a man in a wheelchair for 53 minutes, and he pushed them open himself. Cold air entered. Selim looked up. He looked the way a person looks when they have been bracing for disappointment for so long that the arrival of something else takes a moment to register. He blinked. The morning light was behind Varen, cutting around his silhouette, and for a second Selim just stared. "You came," Selim said. 2 words, said quietly, the kind of words that carry more weight than their size. Varen stepped through the doorway and crouched down to eye level in front of the wheelchair. He looked at Selim the way you look at something you left behind and found in worse shape than you left it, carefully, precisely cataloging every detail. The shaking hands, the thin robe against the cold, the bag clutched in both arms like armor, the way Selim's jaw was set, not from cold, but from the sustained effort of holding himself together. Varen held eye contact for 3 full seconds. Then he stood. He turned back toward the lobby that had gone very, very quiet. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing that would stay with the staff for weeks afterward. Not anger, not volume, not threat. Just the particular quality of a question asked in complete calm by someone who already knew the answer and wanted you to understand that he knew it. "Which one of you decided my pregnant Omega should wait outside?" No one answered. An administrator near the check-in desk opened her mouth. Closed it. The intake clerk who had sent Selim outside 45 minutes ago was looking at her computer screen with the focus of someone who had decided the screen was the only safe place to look. Silence. Then, from the second floor, the sound of phones ringing. Multiple lines. Simultaneously. Because Sira, standing just inside the entrance doors with his tablet in one hand, had done what Sira did when presented with a problem. He had opened the access panel and started looking. And what he found when he looked was enough to justify what he was doing right now, running a full audit query against the hospital's administrative system. The query was legal. The query was also the kind of thing that locked read access protocols across the entire network while it ran, including the financial record servers. Upstairs, in the hospital's data management office, 3 screens had just gone to a holding pattern. A 4th screen, the one connected to the billing authorization system, had gone completely dark. An IT administrator stared at it, picked up his phone, dialed the system support line, got a recording, and downstairs in the lobby of Oraline Medical Center, in the cold air still drifting in through the open doors, Varen Cade turned back towards Selim. "Can you move?" Selim looked at him steadily. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere that will actually let you inside." Behind them, one by one, the hospital's financial servers began locking down. The car smelled like leather and cedar and the faint trace of coffee. Selim sat in the back seat with a blanket across his lap. Draxen had produced it from somewhere without being asked, and watched the city move past the window. Gray streets, bare trees, the slow exhale of morning traffic opening up as the sedans moved through it. His hands had stopped shaking. That surprised him. He had expected being near Varen again to make things harder. He had built that expectation carefully over 14 months, layering it with every good reason he had left. And sitting here now, with the warmth of the car replacing the cold of the concrete and the contractions spacing out, slightly, just slightly, his hands were still. That bothered him in a way he couldn't quite name. 3 years ago, Selim Viral had been working transit security in the lower freight district. Night shifts. Quiet work. The kind of job that put you in proximity to a lot of money moving through dark places without ever making you part of the money. He was good at it. He kept his head down and his record clean, and he saved enough to pay for his own healthcare without relying on the district's standard Omega welfare plan. That all changed on a Thursday in February. He didn't know, when he clocked in that night, that two rival factions of the CADE Consortium's expansion network were settling a boundary dispute in the warehouse 3 blocks from his post. He didn't know that the dispute would go sideways, that shots would be fired, that a ricocheted round would travel through a wall and find him instead of the intended target. He woke up in a hospital, not outside one, inside, the good kind, the kind with private rooms and someone monitoring his chart every 40 minutes. It took him 2 days to understand why. On the 3rd day, a man came to his room. Dark eyes, a stillness that felt chosen rather than natural. He introduced himself by first name only. Baron, he said. The eye incident was his responsibility. He said that was unacceptable to him. He said that Selim's medical costs, lost wages, and recovery expenses would be handled completely. He did not say sorry. Selim noticed that. I don't want compensation, Selim had told him. What do you want? He hadn't had an answer. So Varin had sat in the chair beside his bed and waited, with the patience of someone who had learned that silence was its own kind of pressure, until the answer came. I want to know it won't happen to someone else. Varin had looked at him for a long time after that. Then he had said quietly, That's a harder ask than money. I know, Selim said. That conversation lasted 4 hours. The next one lasted 6. He was the only person, Varin told him once, months later in a different room in different circumstances, who talked to him like the power didn't exist. Not because Selim was fearless, but because Selim had seen what the power actually cost. It had cost him a bullet in the shoulder and 3 months of recovery. That made it harder to be impressed. Power can protect people, but it can also push them away. Selim pushed back. When he discovered he was pregnant, he made the decision the same way he made most decisions, quietly, alone, at 4 in the morning when the city was too tired to have opinions about it. He was not going to raise a child inside the orbit of a crime empire. Not because he didn't trust Varin specifically, because he understood systems. And systems built on force, even well-intentioned ones, had a way of pulling people into shapes they hadn't chosen. He had left. He had not said goodbye. He had taken the number, just in case. Now, sitting in the warmth of the car that had come because he finally used the number, Selim shifted slightly in the seat and felt the baby respond. A slow press of a heel against his ribs, deliberate, almost communicative. He pressed back. Almost there, he said, quiet enough that only the baby would hear. Then the contraction hit, different from the others. Not a wave, not a slow roll, a fist. It came fast and it came hard and Selim's whole body locked against it. A sound escaping him before he could stop it. Sharp, involuntary, real, and in the front seat Varin went completely still. He turned. Selim's face was white. Both hands were pressed flat against his stomach. His breathing had changed, faster, shallower, the kind of breathing you do when pain is trying to outrun reason. Their eyes met. Selim exhaled and said the 4 words that erased every piece of careful distance Varin had maintained for 14 months. I think the baby's coming. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. That was the problem. Sira Cade sat in the corner office of the hospital's administrative wing, a room they had not been invited into, but had not been stopped from entering either, which amounted to the same thing, and worked through the data with the focused patience of a surgeon. Varin stood near the door, watching. Selim had been transferred. A private medical transport, one of 3 the consortium kept on standing contract, had taken him to Meridian Women's Center 12 blocks east. Draxon had gone with him. Varin had stayed, because there was something here worth understanding. Sira pulled up the first flagged record. An Omega patient, 26 years old, active labor, arrived at Oraline at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Insurance authorization pending. Time to triage. 4 hours and 17 minutes. He pulled the second. Different name, different date, same pattern. Then the third. Same. How far back does this go? Varin asked. Sierra scrolled. 14 months of records I can access. He paused. It goes back further than that. I just don't have authorization to reach it. He turned the screen so Varen could see. The data was a column of names and timestamps. Next to each name, 2 numbers. Time of arrival and time of triage. The gap between them. The waiting time was highlighted. For non-Omega patients with confirmed insurance, the average gap was 11 minutes. For Omega patients with pending authorization, 2 hours and 48 minutes. That number. Pause on that. 2 hours and 48 minutes. It's not a policy, Sierra said. There's no written rule that says Omegas wait longer. What there is, he opened another window, is an automated triage scoring algorithm. Pulls patient data at intake. Assigns a priority score. The score determines how fast a patient gets processed. Varen looked at the screen. And the algorithm is scoring Omega patients lower. The algorithm is scoring patients with pending insurance authorization lower. Omega patients have a statistically higher rate of pending authorization at the time of intake because they're more likely to be on gap coverage plans that take longer to verify. Sierra closed the window. The discrimination isn't written anywhere. It's built into the math. A hospital administrator, a man named Reeves, silver-haired, visibly unhappy, stood near the wall with his arms folded. Everything the algorithm does is compliant with our operational efficiency guidelines, Reeves said. We're not targeting anyone. The system prioritizes confirmed patients to reduce resource allocation gaps. That's standard practice across. Standard practice, Varen said quietly, does not make it right. Reeves opened his mouth, closed it. Varen had not raised his voice. He had not moved from the door. His tone carried no heat. It was, if anything, completely reasonable, and that somehow made the room feel smaller. Legal and ethical are not the same thing, Varen said. You're aware of that. Reeves said nothing. Sierra set down the tablet. He looked at Varen. There's more. Varen waited. The algorithm wasn't built in-house. It was designed and implemented by a consulting firm called Stratford Outcomes Group. He pulled up a corporate filing on the screen. Stratford contracts with 17 hospital networks across the state. All 17 use a variation of the same triage algorithm. He let that sit. Then, Stratford's majority investor is a private equity group called Northwall Capital. Northwall holds significant positions in 3 supplemental insurance carriers. Varen went still. The same carriers, Sierra said, that provide the gap coverage plans most Omega patients in this city rely on. The plans with the slower authorization times. The room went quiet. The administrator had stopped looking at the wall. So the insurance company profits when authorizations are slow, Varen said. The algorithm penalizes slow authorizations. And the consulting firm that designed the algorithm is funded by the insurance company. Sierra nodded once. They built a system, Varen said, that generates the problem and then punishes people for having it. Reeves took a step forward. Now hold on. Stratford is an independent. Draxon found the investment trail in 40 minutes, Sierra said. He said it without looking at Reeves. It took 40 minutes. You've been using this system for 3 years. Silence. Hard silence. The kind that lands on a room and stays. Varen pulled out his phone. Looked at the screen. A message from Draxon. 1 word. Stable. He exhaled. 1 short, quiet exhale, and put the phone back in his pocket. Keep pulling records, he said to Sierra. Then he looked at Reeves. And nobody leaves this building until I understand exactly how deep this goes. Reeves reached for his own phone. Varen didn't stop him. Because whoever Reeves was calling, whatever board members or attorneys or communications teams were about to get very early morning phone calls. It didn't matter. The investors who designed this algorithm had been profiting quietly for 3 years. As of this morning, that was over. Draxon's message came in at 8:43 a.m. 2 words this time. She's asking. Varen read it standing in the hallway outside the administrative office and understood immediately. Selim was asking about what was happening at Oraline, which meant Selim was coherent enough to ask questions, which was, somehow, both a relief and a problem, because what was happening at Oraline was a question with several possible answers. Sira had pulled enough data to make a case. A real case. The kind that moved through regulatory bodies and civil courts and state health oversight committees. The kind that took 2 years and cost a hospital its operating license. The kind that, if structured correctly, could dismantle Stratford Outcomes Group's contracts with all 17 hospital networks. The kind that would hurt real people in the meantime. That was the part Varen was standing in the hallway thinking about. He walked back into the office. Sira was at the desk. 3 tablets open. A yellow legal pad covered in notes. He had the careful, concentrated expression of a man who had found something significant and was deciding how to use it. "Talk to me," Varen said. "We have 2 options." Sira turned the legal pad. Option 1. We pursue a full financial collapse of Oraline's current ownership group. Pull the infrastructure contracts. Accelerate the audit referral to the State Regulatory Board. Leak the Stratford Northwall connection to investigative press. The hospital goes into administrative receivership within 90 days. Varen looked at the notepad. And the patients currently inside the building. Transferred to other facilities. It would be disruptive. Some of them are in critical care. Sira's voice didn't change. He was not arguing for or against. He was laying out what was true. Some of those transfers would be dangerous. Option 2. We buy it. Varen looked at him. The current ownership group has been trying to exit for 18 months. They're over-leveraged from their last expansion. The CADE consortium acquires controlling interest. It would take maybe 72 hours to structure properly, and we install an interim board. Sira leaned back. We keep the lights on. We replace the algorithm. We implement new triage protocols. We remove Stratford's contract and refer the Northwall investment trail to the state AG independently. The hospital stays open. The hospital stays open. Varen was quiet for a moment. Draxon appeared in the doorway. He had a coffee in one hand and the expression of someone who had been listening from the hall for the last 3 minutes. I already drafted the financial collapse, Draxon said. It's clean. It's fast. They would feel it by end of business today. Varen looked at his brother. And the people in the ICU. Draxon didn't answer that. Because there wasn't a clean answer. There wasn't a version where they destroyed the institution and every vulnerable person inside it landed safely. Draxon knew that. He just wanted Varen to make the call. Varen's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Selim. He answered. The voice on the other end was steady. Steadier than it had any right to be, given the circumstances. Selim did not ask how Varen was doing. He did not offer comfort. He said directly, "Don't shut it down." Varen said nothing. "I know that's what Draxon wants to do, and I know part of you does too." A pause. A short breath. "But there are people in that building right now who need it. Shut it down and you're doing the same thing they did to me. Just with a different reason." Varen sat down in the chair across from Sira. Sira watched him. "What do you want?" Varen asked. The same question he had asked years ago in a hospital room in different circumstances. The answer came back the same way it had then. Quiet. Direct. Without hesitation. Fix it. Varen looked at Sira. Sira was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call the acquisition team," he said. And within the hour, the CADE Consortium's legal division began drafting the paperwork that would make Oraline Medical Center, the hospital that had left a pregnant Omega sitting outside in the cold, a CADE property. Not as punishment, as responsibility. Varen made one quiet call to his legal team as the morning stretched toward 9 o'clock. By noon, the consortium's financial arm had begun purchasing controlling shares of Oraline's parent company. By 3 in the afternoon, the current board had been notified. And somewhere across the city, In a glass tower that held the offices of Northwall Capital, three men who had spent years building an algorithm that quietly profited from other people's pain sat in a conference room and watched their phones light up with calls they did not yet understand. But they would. The room at Meridian Women's Center was warm. That was the first thing Varen noticed when he walked through the door at 9:17 a.m. Not sterile cold, not institutional distance, but actual warmth. A reading lamp on the side table. A blanket that someone had folded and placed at the foot of the bed. A window that looked out onto a courtyard where a bare tree stood in winter light. Small things. They mattered more than they should have. Selim was in the bed. Monitors attached. And 4-line running into the back of his left hand. He looked exhausted in the way that people look exhausted when they have been running on adrenaline for hours and the adrenaline has finally started to thin. Draxon was in the chair by the window, arms folded, saying nothing. Varen stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked in, pulled the second chair close to the bed, and sat down. He didn't say anything either. The monitor beeped steadily. The contraction tracker showed irregular spacing, closer together than an hour ago, the nurse had said. Active labor. Moving forward. They were watching it. Selim looked at the ceiling. You bought the hospital, he said. Starting to. How long will it take? 72 hours for controlling interest. Longer for full restructure. Selim was quiet for a moment. And Stratford. The AG referral goes out this afternoon. Independent of the acquisition. Whatever happens with Oraline, Stratford's contract network gets investigated on its own track. Selim nodded slowly. Another contraction started. Varen watched Selim's face. Watched the way the jaw set, the way the breath changed, the deliberate and practiced stillness of someone managing serious pain. He did not reach for his hand. Did not offer words. Just stayed. Present. Still. The contraction passed. Selim exhaled. You're doing the thing, he said. What thing? The thing where you get very quiet and very still and think I can't tell you're upset. Varen looked at him. You can tell. Every time. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The particular silence of two people who have known each other long enough that quiet doesn't require filling. Real power isn't controlling the world. Sometimes it's learning to sit beside someone in pain and not try to fix the pain. Just sit. The nurse came in at 10:04. Checked the monitors. Made a note. Said the contractions were progressing well, that the baby was positioned correctly, that they were tracking everything closely. She was calm and specific, and she looked Selim in the eye when she spoke to him. That mattered too. Draxon left the room at some point. Varen noticed the chair was empty and then stopped noticing. Sira texted twice. Legal updates. Varen read them and put the phone in his pocket. At 11:30, the contractions shifted. Not gradually. Suddenly. The spacing collapsed. For minutes 3, 2.5, and the pain in Selim's face changed quality entirely. Less managed. More real. The kind that stops being an obstacle and becomes the entire world. 2 nurses came in quickly. Then a third. Varen stood, moved back toward the wall to give them room, and watched. The room had a different energy now. Focused. Efficient. People moving the way medical people move when something is actually happening and there is work to do. Okay. Selim, I need you to breathe with me. I am breathing. Good. Good. You're doing great. A monitor alarm sounded. Not the steady beep. A different sound. Higher. Urgent. One of the nurses looked at the screen and said something to the other nurse in a low voice. A word Varen couldn't catch. The second nurse moved to the door and opened it and said something to someone outside. More people entered. A doctor. 2 additional nurses. A cart being wheeled in from the hallway. Varen stayed against the wall. He could feel his own heartbeat in his throat, which was unusual. He was not a man who felt his heartbeat often. He had been in rooms with guns, in rooms with men who wanted to kill him, in rooms where outcomes were genuinely unclear. This was different. What's happening? He asked. Nobody answered immediately. They were busy. Heart rate. One of the nurses said quietly. Baby's heart rate dropped. We're monitoring. Varen looked at the monitor. The number on the screen was lower than it had been. He had no medical training. He did not know what the number should be. He knew only that it had been higher before and was lower now, and that the people in the room were moving faster. Selim's eyes found him across the room. Varen held the look. He did not look away. The monitor showed the number. It dropped again. And the room went very, very quiet. 7 seconds. That was how long the silence lasted. 7 seconds where the monitor showed a number that was too low, and the doctor's hands moved with the specific speed of someone who is trained for exactly this moment and is now inside it, and Varen Cade, a man who had faced down boardrooms and cartels and the kind of quiet power that ruins cities, stood against a wall and felt completely helpless. Then the number climbed. Slowly. Then faster. Then the monitor settled back into a steady rhythm, and the room exhaled. Not all at once, but in pieces, each person releasing the breath they hadn't known they were holding. The doctor looked up. We're okay. Cord pressure. It's resolved. Selim had both hands pressed flat against the mattress. His knuckles were white. Selim. The doctor's voice was direct and calm. You are doing everything right. The baby is stable. I need you to push when I tell you. Selim nodded. He looked across the room at Varen. Come here, he said. Varen moved. He crossed the room in 4 steps, reached for Selim's hand, and held it. Selim's grip was immediate, tight, certain, the grip of someone who knew exactly what they were reaching for. And then there was no more time for silence or distance or 14 months of careful choices. There was only this room, this moment, this labor moved fast after that. The contractions came in hard waves that didn't recede completely between pushes, stacking on top of each other, relentless and necessary. Selim worked through them the way he worked through most things, with his jaw set and his eyes open and a quiet, furious focus that refused to look away. Varen held his hand through all of it. He did not speak. He did not offer instructions or encouragement or any of the words that would have felt hollow in a moment this large. He just held the hand and was there, present, solid, unmovable, and let that be enough. At 12:47 p.m., Orion Viralcade entered the world. He announced himself loudly, not a tentative sound, a full, committed cry, the kind that filled a room and demanded to be heard, and the nurses laughed and the doctor said, There he is, and someone pressed a warm, rapt, furiously indignant infant against Selim's chest. Selim looked down. He stopped breathing for a moment. Then he breathed, and something in his face, some held tension that had been there for months, maybe longer, released. Varen looked at the baby. He had told himself over the last 14 months that he had managed the distance well, that the structure he had built, functional, respectful, financially responsible, was sufficient, that a man in his position didn't get to want more than what was practical. He had believed that. He did not believe it now. Something broke open quietly in the center of his chest. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just opened. The way a window opens after a long winter and lets in the first air that actually smells like something other than cold. He reached out, carefully, slowly, and touched the top of the baby's head with 2 fingers. Orion Viralcade did not stop crying immediately. He was a newborn with opinions, but he turned his head just slightly toward the warmth of the hand. Varen's throat tightened. He turned away before anyone could see his face. He didn't turn far enough. Draxon, standing in the doorway, said nothing. Sira, who had arrived at some point during labor and was standing beside his brother, said nothing either. They didn't need to. Later, an hour later, when the room had quieted and the nurses had done their checks and the monitors showed 2 steady heartbeats, Selim looked at Varen and said, Orion, Orion, Varen repeated. Viralcade. Varen looked at him. Selim looked back. Don't make it a bigger moment than it is. I won't. Good. But it was. It was exactly that big. Across the city at that same hour, A news alert was moving through media channels. Oraline Medical Center had issued a public statement. The facility was temporarily suspending non-emergency operations for an internal systems review. No timeline given. No specifics. The statement was careful and said very little. But people noticed, because hospitals don't suspend operations without a reason. And the rumors that followed. About an audit, about an algorithm, about an investment firm with connections to the very insurance plans that had kept a pregnant Omega waiting in the cold for 53 minutes, moved through the city's healthcare community the way real information moves. Fast. Without stopping. And in a glass tower across town, 3 men who ran Northwall Capital sat in a conference room and watched the news alert appear on the screen and understood, for the first time, that something they had built quietly in the dark had just been pulled into the light. The reason wasn't revenge. It was reform. And that was somehow more dangerous. 7 months later, the building on Whitmore Avenue had been a vacant pharmacy for 4 years. Before that, a check-cashing place. Before that, a community health clinic that ran out of funding in 2019 and closed without announcement, leaving a paper sign on the door that nobody took down for 6 months. The neighborhood remembered it. That was why Selim had chosen this location. He stood inside now on a Tuesday morning in early fall, watching the last of the equipment being installed in the intake room. New chairs, wide enough to be comfortable. A check-in desk at counter height. Not elevated, not positioned to look down at people who came in. Waiting area with natural light. A children's corner. Privacy screen. Small things. Chosen deliberately. The Whitmore Maternity Clinic would open its doors on Thursday. It was the second clinic in a planned network of 5, the Cade Foundation's independent maternity care initiative, funded entirely through private capital and structured to operate outside the standard insurance authorization framework for intake purposes. You arrived. You were seen. The paperwork came after. That was the policy. 1 sentence. Written by Selim. Reviewed by a team of medical ethicists and patient advocates. Signed off by the Foundation's board. No one waited outside. Oraline Medical Center had reopened 6 weeks earlier. Different in the ways that mattered. The triage algorithm had been replaced, not patched, replaced with a protocol designed by independent medical ethicists and reviewed by a state oversight committee. Emergency labor admissions were now processed immediately upon arrival, regardless of insurance status. Billing followed care, not the other way around. An ethics oversight board met monthly. It included patient advocates, community representatives, and 2 Omega healthcare specialists. The Stratford Outcomes Group's contract had been terminated across all 17 hospital networks. The state AG investigation was ongoing. Northwall Capital had retained 4 law firms and was being very quiet. Administrator Reeves had resigned. Nobody had asked him to. He had simply read the audit report, sat with it for 2 days, and submitted his letter. Selim didn't know how to feel about that. He had expected to feel something sharper. Instead, it was just done. Finished. 1 chapter of a larger story closing. He walked to the window of the intake room and looked out at Whitmore Avenue. Morning traffic. A woman pushing a stroller. 2 kids in school uniforms at the corner. He had grown up 4 blocks from here. He knew what it felt like to be in a waiting room in this neighborhood and understand. Not from a sign, not from a policy, but from the accumulated weight of 100 small signals, that you were not the priority. That the system had been designed with someone else in mind. That your job was to wait and be grateful for whatever came. He knew what it felt like. He was building something that felt different. Orion was with his grandmother that morning. Selim's mother, Vivian, who had driven in from Denton the week the clinic site was announced and had not fully left since. She had opinions about everything, the chair colors, the signage font, the temperature of the waiting room. Selim had listened to all of them, used about half. His phone buzzed. A text from Varen. 1 line. On my way. Selim looked at it for a moment, set the phone in his pocket. Varen Cade had not attended a single press interview about the Cade Foundation's clinic initiative, had not given a statement to any of the news coverage. had not appeared in any of the photographs. His name was on the funding documents. That was all. Sierra had tried twice to suggest a public announcement, something that acknowledged the foundation's role, that positioned the Cade brand in a positive light. It was good strategy. It made obvious sense. Varen had said no both times. "This isn't about the brand," he said, and that was the end of the conversation. Redemption rarely arrives in a single heroic moment. It grows through thousands of small choices to do better. Most of them invisible, most of them unremarked, most of them made in rooms where no one is watching. At 9:04 a.m., a black sedan pulled up on Whitmore Avenue. Varen stepped out. He wore no tie, no suit jacket, dark shirt, sleeves pushed back. He looked less like a man who controlled infrastructure networks and more like a man who had somewhere to be that mattered. He walked to the clinic door. Selim was already there, holding it open. Varen stopped, looked at the building, the new sign, the clean windows, the light coming through. "You chose this neighborhood on purpose," he said. "Yes, because of where you grew up. Because of where a lot of people grew up." Selim looked at him steadily. "And because the system failed here first. It makes sense to fix it here first." Varen looked at him for a moment. Then he walked through the door. No speeches, no ceremony. Just a man who had once built his legacy on power, learning slowly, at some cost, what it actually meant to use it. The clinic was quiet that morning, waiting for Thursday, waiting for the first patient who would walk through that door and be seen immediately. Not because of who they were, not because of who they knew, but because that was simply what the door was for. That was the legacy, not a name on a building, not a press release, not a line in a business filing. A door that opened, for everyone, every time. But somewhere in a glass tower across the city, the men behind Northwall Capital were still watching, still calculating. Their algorithm had been dismantled. Their contracts had been pulled. Their names were now part of an ongoing state investigation. They had resources. They had attorneys. They had patience. And they were not done. If you have made it this far, thank you. This story was built for people who know what it means to sit outside a door that should have been open. If that is you or someone you love, share this in the comments. Your story matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story on this channel, because the next one is coming, and it starts exactly where this one ends. The fight is not over, and neither are we.